So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for showing up for this session, which is happening immediately after lunch. I'm delighted to be in conversation with Amitabha Bagchi, who's written this, as you've just mentioned, a really complex novel, Unknown City. It's a novel that delves into the interiority of a man's psychological makeup. He's 50 years old, Arindam Chatterjee. We first encounter him in your novel Above Average. He's 50 years old now in Unknown City, and he has this somewhat nostalgic gaze upon relationships that have gone wrong. And before I delve into your novel, I'm tempted to evoke the spirit of D.H. Lawrence, who also explores intimacies between men and women. And he explores this really complex terrain that exists between men and women and the kind of things that can go wrong in a relationship between men and women. So D.H. Lawrence's characters, and in particular Lady Chatterley, she seeks comfort, solace, physical intimacy outside the confines of marriage. His men can be peevish and sickly and guilt-ridden and abusive as well. D.H. Lawrence is an extremely complex novelist to delve into, and I'm tempted to evoke him because I feel several of the themes that you have explored in your novel coincide with, say, Sons and Lovers or Lady Chatterley's Lovers. I'd like to quote from Lady Chatterley's Lover. He says that, and a woman had to yield. A man was like a child with his appetites. A woman had to yield him what he wanted, or like a child, he would probably turn nasty and flounce away and spoil what was a very pleasant connection. So Arindam Chatterjee spoils very pleasant connections. And my first question to you is, what is this compulsive need to look back? You as an author as well as Arindam Chatterjee as a protagonist, why does he look back? Is it a reappraisal of the past, or is it a nostalgic indulgence?
Yeah, thanks, Radhika. So, firstly, I have to say, thank you to the Malayalam Manorama group for inviting me here. Beautiful venue. Kerala is a wonderful place. Food is also fantastic. And thank you, Radhika, for agreeing to be in conversation with me about this book. So, yeah, the question about looking back and why does one look back and what are the stages in life when you start looking back is definitely a part of the part of what this book is about. That and in some ways I haven't spelt out what it is that Arindam is seeking as he looks back at the failed relationships he's having. It's also clear from the book that he is currently in a stable and happy marriage for some time, and he's getting to 50, he's looking at the times when he was in his 20s and 30s and the relationships that failed there. And so um, in terms of plot, if you would call it that, he mentions at one point that there's this friend that he had in his late 20s, Paroma, who was also a writer, and somewhere down the line she stopped replying to his emails,
Yeah.
and he's wondering why that is the case. And he's looking, he starts trying to answer that question, and when he starts trying to answer that question, all those relationships start unfurling in front of
Yeah,
him.
yeah, yeah.
So, sometimes we do travel, we move away from people, relationships of the past end. Sometimes we don't want them to end, they change. And at that point, there is some regret. But I think also to make peace with the end of those relationships, sometimes you need to examine them and ask yourself what went wrong, or more specifically, what did I do wrong,
Yeah.
right? And what did the other person do wrong?
That's interesting, and the fact that you mentioned Paroma, the character first encounters her when, in Lady Shri Ram College, which is another really beloved landmark in Delhi, and she's wearing a little beret on her head, and she's wearing it at a slant, and he immediately decides to stereotype her. So right through your novel, there are women whose intellectual abilities are disparaged by Arindam Chatterjee. He doesn't really take them seriously. He doesn't take their minds seriously. So when he moves to the US, he encounters Lillian and Monique at a film appreciation class, and they're also part of an MFA cohort. And instantly, he decides that Lillian's critical abilities aren't up to par. Why is it? What do you think what is this? What is this tendency a symptom of? What is it symptomatic of? Not to take women's intellectual abilities seriously.
Yeah, so this is the, I mean, this is part of a kind of reappraisal
Yeah.
that where, what happens, I think we all have this experience that there are many presumptions, prejudices, assumptions that we simply kind of have and we don't even know that we have them.
Yeah.
We even act on them or we act based on them and we
Yeah.
don't think too much about it. Like, we were walking around Kochi, my wife and I, and it was clear that there were a lot of the posters of politicians have women politicians in them.
Yeah.
Whereas in Delhi, when we walk around, we see similar posters of politicians, different political parties, and the number of women we see here is much more than the number we see in Delhi. But we walk around the city there and we see these posters. We don't pay much attention to them, but we don't even realize that something is missing, and that in Delhi we naturally assume that the local politician is a man,
Yeah.
right? Occasionally there'll be a woman and then you can track whose wife she must be or what her role in the scheme of things must be. So these are like this what when Arindam looks back at the time he spent with those MFA students with whom he made friends, he realized that making looking down on the women just sort of happened without him necessarily even understanding that he was doing it or that he had any other option. This is the problem with deeply ingrained prejudices, is that they're naturalized. We just assume that's how it is. So I mean, part of the point of this book is the way that the character, as he starts going inwards, like typically we write books or we have these outward explorations, but when you make these inward explorations you suddenly discover these kind of dark areas.
Absolutely. Do you think it's also because Arindam Chatterjee is from IIT and that's a hyper masculine universe? You mentioned the fact that it's a hyper masculine universe right at the outset, that he's drawn to the arts and that he's drawn to women from the arts. But at the same time, because he belongs to a certain universe and because there are these deeply ingrained prejudices, he looks down upon them instantly. Do you think it's because of that?
So I mean, definitely that does appear to be a kind of the reason. I mean that, but there is something more to it than just simply saying IIT, for example, which is one kind of cultural trope in our culture. Uh, like many years ago, I attended a class on film by Professor Veena Das, who's an anthropologist, and she showed Mughal Azam. And she pointed out how the character of Salim, he grows up in the Zanana, but at a certain age of, when he's quite young, 10, 12, he's removed from the world of women and he's sent to the battlefield where he's taught how to become a man. And then in his 20s, when his, let's call it masculation
Yeah.
is completed, then he comes back to the world of women. I mean, to the world where women also exist. And in some sense, his maybe one way of reading it is that his obsessive love for Anarkali, who is inappropriate person for him to love, is because has not known women as companions, classmates, this that, and in many ways, like it was not just at IIT. So when I was in class 11. I took science with computer science. I was on the JE track. There were 35,
Yeah.
40 people, 5 of them were girls. Then I went to IIT Delhi. There were 45 of us, 0 of them were girls. Then I went to a computer science department in the US where there were girls, but again the ratio was something similar. Like in the graduate students, women graduate students and women professors were a small fraction. So it was similar to that process that Salim went. You're removed, like if you have a certain a tendency towards, say, maths and science.
Yeah.
At least at that time. Today it is no longer the case, and certainly in places like Kerala and all, it is not
Yeah.
like that. But at that time in the north, definitely it was like that. That if you had if you liked maths, if you liked physics,
Yeah.
if you wanted to take JE or something like that, then you were naturally removed from the world of women, and you would stay removed for a very long time. And the funny thing is, then when you were released back into the world of into the world where women were also, and you were supposed to make relationships with them, you were then expected to have healthy relationships with them. How was that ever going to happen? That was never
Absolutely.
going to happen.
I'm tempted to ask you about one of the characters, Supriya, because Supriya is someone that Arindam Chatterjee obsesses about. He likes her. He's unable to articulate his feelings initially, and they do get together for a while. But then that, I think, is like the nexus of regret in this novel. The fact
Yeah,
that he can't get together with Supriya, who's from JNU. She represents the arts.
right.
She's from JNU. Do you want to talk about that problematic relationship?
Sure. What I'll do is, in fact, I had decided to read a little bit which
Sure.
was related to this stuff.
Okay.
So I'll just read that, which will sort of contextualize what you're saying.
Yeah.
So okay, I'll just read.
Yeah.
In so Okay, I'll give a little context. Arindam graduates from IIT in '96, and he goes to the US to do his PhD. And then he in '97 he reconnects with this girl Supriya, whom he had known somewhat in school. And from there I'll read. In 1997, it appeared to me at least that the conditions for Supriya and I to understand each other were solidly in place, almost excessively so. We were both from non Hindi speaking families, Tamil in her case and Bangla in mine, who had grown up as part of the English speaking elite of Hindi speaking Delhi.
Yeah.
We had both gone to the same quote unquote good school that placed undue emphasis on academic achievement. We both had mothers who were school teachers and whose inability to accept that they were ever in the wrong may have sprung from their desperate need to maintain order in the classroom, but led to their own children feeling unsure of themselves back at home. We both had fathers who were in government service, thanks to which we had grown up in the leafy and sanitized part of Delhi that the government of India allowed its senior officers to live in till they were so senior that they had to retire, thereby physically expelling their children from the Eden of their childhoods. An expulsion I had already experienced in 1990, and that Supriya was to experience not long after we met in 1997.
Yeah.
The eye that seeks similarities is blind to differences, and so I overlooked the fact that she had studied social science and the humanities in school while I had studied science, that she had taken history in Delhi University and had since moved on to JNU, bastion of the left, progressive to the core, for a master's, while I had studied computer science at IIT Delhi, sexist and conservative nursery for the right wingers of the future, and was now in graduate school in the US, a country that was known to be the great enemy of all that was good and right in the world, even by people like Pandeyji, who ran a small stall on the JNU campus from which he supplied individual cigarettes on credit to the impoverished PhD candidates who generally happened to be members of some communist party or the other. Actually, overlooked is the wrong word here. In fact, now that I think about it, this difference was what further attracted me to her. The impulses within me that drove me to reading and writing had been heightened in the few months I had spent at Johns Hopkins because its massive library and liberal internet access had given me entry into a world of art, history, culture, film, and literature, the likes of which I had never had before. These impulses were pushing me to seek out people with whom I could talk about all the various thoughts and ideas that were fizzing within me as a consequence of this exposure. I had met a few such people at a class on writing about film I had taken in my first semester, but none of them were Indian or interested in India, so I couldn't talk to them about, for example, Paula Richman's many Ramayans or Alan Seeley's The Trotternama. Internet forums and mailing lists were a recourse, but the staginess and posturing of the social media that was yet to be invented was prefigured in these forums, and although I learned a lot from them, they didn't feel like places where a productive conversation could be conducted. And even if it could, the ambition that had lain dormant in my IIT years, that had been awoken by my contact with the MFA students I had met in the film writing class, the ambition of becoming a novelist, was so fragile that the withering heat of the internet was likely to burn it to a crisp. Putting it down makes it clearer to me than it was earlier that I was looking at the time for someone who had the knowledge and intellectual depth to help me navigate the wide world of cultural production, as I looked for that corner of it in which I could stake my own claim as a writer. It was a journey that would take me both outward as well as inward, and I didn't know if I could make that journey on my own. I have no direct recollection of what I was thinking when I met Supriya in January 1997, but I think I identified her as a person who could help me along my way. I eventually did write that first novel, the one that is hardest to write. It got published under the title In Crossing This River, and people read it too. In that novel, I wrote a line that went like this: it is a blessing to be understood, and it is an even bigger blessing to be granted understanding. But when I look back at 1997, I realize that I was basically looking to be understood, and in that process, I didn't try, past a point, to understand Supriya.
So, on that note, I have a few questions. The first one is about the MFA cohort, which Arindam Chatterjee is really drawn to and is repulsed by. So he makes all these sardonic comments on MFA students, the fact that they're obsessed with black turtlenecks and they're sort of addicted to their champagne flutes. It's a world he pretends to look down upon, but at the same time, it's a world he's irresistibly drawn to because he's not yet part of it. So do you want to talk about this conundrum and what is it that draws him? And what is it that repulses him simultaneously to the MFA?
See, I think the thing about writing and literature and so on is that it has these two very contradictory aspects to it. On the one hand, there's the world of publishing and high culture and and lit fests and so on and so forth. On the other hand, writing and literature is about deeply interior
Yeah.
journeys where you have to sit on your own and think about stuff and all that.
Yeah.
And it is also clear, I think, to some extent, that the hanging out, the being part of the scene is kind of the opposite of what you need to be able to make those interior
Yeah.
journeys.
Yeah.
And yet the glamour of it draws you,
Yeah.
right? And this is not new, right? I mean, this is
Absolutely.
something over centuries, artists, writers, musicians have experienced this dichotomy,
Yeah.
right?
Do you think,
So yeah,
yeah.
go ahead, go ahead.
Do you think a lot of writers are drawn to the writerly life and don't want to put in the work? I mean, it's just a question I thought of spontaneously because we're talking about Lit Fest, we're talking about, sitting at a podium and discussing a novel. But to get here is a very solitary process. It's a very isolating experience to write a book and to have it published. But most people are drawn to what they see. Do you think authors are mostly inspired by that? Which is why, the few good ones that get here have a difficult journey. And the ones who get here for fame then fall on the wayside anyway.
See, it's hard to tell. The thing with fame is that fame has more to do with what the market or the audience is looking for at a particular point in time,
Yeah,
right? And I think it's pretty clear that not it's not only the people who are writing the best works who are getting famous,
yeah,
right? A lot of good works go fall by the wayside, and a lot of the things that are read and even celebrated are basically junk. I mean, let's be clear about that. And I think that has happened in all times. It's not pointing a finger at now or then. So it's a human impulse, right? I mean, like you mentioned the quote from D.H. Lawrence. The appetite that seeks out. Nowadays, in our time, we have this new term for it. We say dopamine. You want a dopamine hit,
kick. Yeah,
right? So the appetites are always seeking you,
yeah,
right?
true.
And those kind of appetites which lead you to a inwardness and all. So you know, I look at it this way. There's a line somewhere in this book about how. What is the definition of a writer, right? Arindam is trying to figure this out.
Yeah,
And he says something like this, that people think that cricketers are those who can spend if you want to be a cricketer, you have to spend hours knocking a ball with a piece of wood.
yeah,
But actually speaking, it's the person who enjoys knocking a ball with a piece of wood for hours who becomes a cricketer,
absolutely.
right? Similarly, it's like you think that, okay, if I'm a writer, I have to deal with language, but actually it's the people who love dealing with language who become writers.
Yeah.
So that is a particular view on the matter, right? On the other hand, there may be someone else who says that, oh, you got to write, like a very famous novelist who nowadays writes non-fiction. He once told me, he said, why are you writing novels that no one wants to read? So you're sitting at IIT, you should write non-fiction, everyone wants to know about it. So
It's true.
I mean, it's true, right? His point is that you are writing stuff. Very few people are reading it. You want an audience. You
Yeah.
have options of writing
Yeah.
things that people want to read about. But the thing is that for some people, the it's not you don't you write what you have to write and then hope that people will read it.
Absolutely.
You
So on
can't
that
run after
note, so is
the
this
thing.
how much of you has bled into Arindam Chatterjee? Are you Arindam Chatterjee? Is this metafiction? Have you mined your own life? And if you have, how much of that life has changed on the page? Because fiction alters reality.
Yeah, see, look, definitely the Arindam shares biographical elements with myself.
Yeah.
And I have definitely my life in this, but somehow that somehow that aspect of it is not that interesting. It's like if you read Proust, right? Proust
Yeah.
also mined the lives of real people
In search of lost time.
in search of lost time. So, but now when we read it, all those people are dead and gone, right? We don't have any context for them, but it still lives. I mean, there is this idea of like the real, which is the writer's notion of real, because if
Yeah.
it feels real, then it's real.
Yeah.
That it is based on someone or something is not that directly relevant. Having said that, I think one thing I do want to point out is that when I first started writing, my first novel was Above Average, which was again based a prequel to this, which was based on autobiographical material, stuff from my own life. At that time, I had this sense that I need to understand better how to write characters, and the best way to do that was to look at the people around me and try to understand what makes them tick, and how I can demonstrate that, how I can bring that onto the page. So, and most of those characters in that book were men. So when I wrote this, there were a similar challenge was there, that I felt, okay, now I've been written a few books. I have a better idea on how to write a character, how the mind of a male character works. But I need to do something a little more to understand how a female character works. So again, I retraced that journey where I took some stuff out of my biographical, out of my own life, and went deeper into some of those people and tried to figure out how they thought, because this was a gap. This was a gap in my thinking, whatever the reason, whether you say you went to IIT, you were removed from the world of men, whatever, the gap was there. And whether this was the right way of filling the gap or not, but at that time it seemed like a way of doing
But
it.
so tell me about the books that you've read, because often we seek books that teach us about writing and craft and great sentences. For me, one of my favorite novels is Zadie Smith's On Beauty. To me, it is the most ideal, most perfect novel. It's perfectly written, and she dedicated that novel to E.M. Forster, who she thought was the most perfect novelist. So is there a novel that you have turned to compulsively that has taught you a little bit about writing?
See, it's different. I have, but for at different stages in my writing career, it has been different.
Yeah.
Right, like my previous book was called Half the Night Is Gone, and when I was reading that book, I I read Krishna Sopti's Zindagi Nama. I read it twice end to end, and it was somehow very important to me. And before that, I had finished reading Proust in Search of Lost Time,
Yeah.
and that was also sort of very important to me in terms of actually what Proust's writing did for me. That as I came into my 40s and I was writing this Half the Night Is Gone, I was feeling that a lot of the certainties that I had when I was in my 30s and all
Yeah.
were all fading away.
Yeah.
I wasn't able to pin thoughts down in single units and present them. Everything that I thought seemed to have multiple aspects. Like I think it's around the time that the whole world moved into this post-truth
Yeah.
kind of era, and the political climate in this country also changed. So all I'm talking about 20 to 2014, 2015,
Yeah.
political climate changed. Everything that we used to believe was good earlier now became bad.
Yeah.
right? And all the verities of childhood were no longer there. So nothing seemed to, no thought seemed to be able to sit on its own.
Okay.
There were always three aspects to it. And Proust's
Yeah.
sentences showed me that, okay, this is possible.
So, on the subject of Proust, he mentions these tiny sponge cakes called mandolins, when dipped in lemon tea, evoke a certain nostalgia. In Proust's case, it takes him back. He grew up in provincial France. So, those tea cakes, those little cakes, took him back to his little cottage in provincial France when his mother laid out tea
Right.
for him. And that, I think,
Wow.
is the role of nostalgia, which plays out really evocatively in your novel because you're looking back. You're constantly looking back. So I'm coming back to nostalgia. We've spoken about it before. Do you think nostalgia, do you think that this nostalgic vein in your novel has romanticized relationships that were really not okay, that relationships that were not compatible?
So actually, in this book, it was kind of an anti-nostalgia, in the sense that with in '96 I graduated from IT. I moved to the US,
Yeah.
and I was really struck by nostalgia, specifically for Delhi. But I
Yeah.
started writing at that time, but I knew that like pure nostalgia leads to bad literature, bad writing. You can't, I mean, because nostalgia has this clawing effect. It prevents you from seeing things the way they. I mean, you
Yeah.
or I won't say that they were really were, because who knows how things really are, but it forces you to see things in a particular way
Yeah. It
and miss
distorts.
out other
Yeah.
kind of aspects of it.
Yeah.
So in this, the going back in this book, the going back to the past is more like in line with Arindam Chatterjee. He's a computer scientist. He's an analytical mind. So he starts just trying to unfurl those relationships and ask simple questions which he had never asked before, and unfurl it. So it's like the past comes back, but now the past is no longer a beautiful country that we used to live in and wish we could go back to. I mean, that sense is there,
Yeah.
but in my writing, even when I wrote Half the Night Is Gone, which is set in a time in the past,
Yeah.
there is this desire to push back that pure nostalgia, push back the idea that the past was a better place than the present is. Right? Because saying that the past is a better place than the present makes the present unlivable, actually.
But the past is another country, and you do move to another country.
Right.
And I wanted to talk about your cityscaping in this particular novel. You moved to the US, but you returned to Delhi compulsively, and the novel is strewn with images of Delhi, which are very familiar to me as well, like Sri Fort, and you attend a Fellini retrospective at Sri Fort, which whets your appetite for world cinema. Do you want to talk about why Arindam Chatterjee returns compulsively to Delhi and the sense of alienation he feels? He wants to explore the world, but he feels alienated from it, and he returns to Delhi, which he considers home. So, what is home, and what is a foreign country?
See, I think one of the things that became clearer to me in writing the previous novel, Half the Night Is Gone, and continued in this one, was that there's really no such thing as home,
Yeah.
because every moment that you feel comfort in and succor in is a moment in place and time, right? And even the very next day is a different time, a different place. So, you have Arindam, he goes to the US and he comes back to India 9 years later. But he's not actually coming back to India, because he comes back to Delhi, he comes back to the same college he went to as a professor, but it's no longer the same college. 9 years have passed, the
Yeah.
place is different. His relationship to that place itself has changed. He's
Yeah.
no longer a student there, he's a professor there. So it is not the same college for him. It is not the same place for him, right? So in a sense that, like, Delhi is an interesting place in the sense that the relationship of the past to the present, it's constantly challenging you. One of the most fantastic works of Indian English writing, which I think is underrated, is Khushwant Singh's Delhi,
Yes.
where he goes through the history of Delhi from centuries.
Yes.
And the great thing about it is that he never sees the past in positive lines. I'll tell you one great bit. I hope you all read that book. I'll tell you one great bit from near the end of the book. So, Khushwant Singh's grandfather was one of the contractors of New Delhi, Sir Sobha Singh. And they built all these, government buildings and all, and they made a lot of money out of that, huge amounts of money out of that. So, there is one chapter near the end called The Builders. And there's an unnamed protagonist who's clearly based on his father or grandfather.
Yeah.
So one of these builders, he's recently, he's buttered up the Brits, got these contracts, made a lot of money. With that money, he's bought a car. So with that, he takes that car and he decides to take the family on a picnic to India Gate, to Qutub Minar, which is pretty far from where he lives in central Delhi. So he goes to Qutub Minar, and in Qutub Minar, he's spread out his chadar on the floor, and he's lying and he's looking up at Qutub Minar. And he starts thinking that, the contractors who built Qutub Minar, how much did they have to bribe the officials in order to get their bills passed? And this material that they built it with, did they also, pretend that it was this much and charge that much
Yeah.
for it?
Yeah.
Right? And I think that is a fantastic moment
And I think
in
it's a
that
great
book.
example.
I mean, it's like the whole, we have a lot of, I mean, even while whatever's going, we have a lot of Mughal era nostalgia. And look,
Yeah.
let's face it, the Mughal era monuments are gorgeous.
Yes.
But no one has ever said that, did the contractors bribe their way into building this Qutub Minar?
Well,
Right? And they must have, because, because that's how power has always worked.
absolutely.
Right? So I think you have nostalgia and you have like these moments where the past and the present connect with each other.
Collide. Yeah.
Right? Where you realize that everything has happened before, although what is happening now has never happened before.
Yeah.
Also, that's also true.
So tell me about the fact that you chose to write a novel, which is a novel of ideas, and you've avoided plot altogether. I don't think there's much of a plot. It's not a typical plot. There's no beginning, middle, and end. And is it because you were exploring interiority? Is it because of the nature of your subject, or are there any other aesthetic concerns?
After I wrote Above Average, a lot of people said, "Oh, there's no plot in this. What's going on? Something, just things keep happening." After that, I was very much like, plot is very important. Story must flow and all that. You know how it is. See, because like I'm a product of the Indian middle class. I went to IIT, so things must happen in a particular way, and I kept doing that. Like,
Yeah.
oh my god, plot. But then I started writing a book, and I was badly stuck. I was very badly stuck in it, and I couldn't figure it out. And then I started writing some notes. I started writing some notes for this, and then I started just journaling. I was like, you know what? I'm stuck with that book. Let me just write some stuff. And as I wrote the stuff, it started accumulating, and then I was like, wait a minute, this can be a book length work of fiction. So avoiding the word novel.
Yeah.
And then I was like, you know what? ठीक है. Sometimes you got to say that all your prejudices about everything don't have to always be put into practice. Sometimes you can tell yourself, ki, okay, just write,
Yeah.
and it's all right. So it just accumulated, and it was a work of fiction, and then someone agreed to publish it. So it's like, why not?
Great. It's also strewn with couplets and music from Rabbi Shergill and shares. And so, why is it that you picked the novel to explore these ideas? And how come you haven't written, like, you clearly are very inclined towards Sufi poetry? How has that influenced your work?
Yeah, look, it's influenced my work a lot. I think for about 15, 20 years, I was mainly what I was reading was either Urdu poetry or Hindi fiction,
Right.
and all that is definitely very much part of my life. And so it's just like, I mean, sometimes, I'm sure it's true in Malayalam also, but in the north, Hindi speakers, Urdu speakers, they normally will quote something every
Yeah.
now and then. It's
Yeah.
it's part of their normal way of
Yeah.
talking. And I think in an earlier time, even in English writing, this did happen. People quoted, like maybe from French and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Nowadays, people don't do that much, but I don't see why not. like when you're writing, you know how it is, right? You're a novelist. You
Yeah.
sit down, you're like, okay, I want to write this, but don't have it all planned out.
Yeah.
And when you're writing, certain things come through at that moment. So if a particular share or something comes through, it comes through.
Great.
So that's a general point. But a specific point is this, that there's one particular poet, Parveen Shakir. So Parveen Shakir, interestingly, had her MA in English. And she was one of the greats of the latter part of the 20th century for Urdu poetry, because she wrote in a completely different way from what other people were writing, including other women poets. And she died young in the 90s and all that. And she had a difficult life. She was married, then she got divorced and all, which was very difficult in a conservative society. She lived in Pakistan. So it's many of her poems are her shades are like a they come from a female feminine sensibility, which is not very far from the world, my world, or Arindam Chatterjee's world,
Yeah.
and it poses certain questions which are not so easy to answer.
Right.
So, in fact, the title of this book, it comes from a शेर of Parveen Shakir,
Yeah.
which goes like this: रास्तों का इल्म था ना समतों की खबर, शहरे नामालूम की चाहत मगर करते रहे. Which means that I didn't know what was where, and the roads were unfamiliar to me, but I still kept wanting that unknown city.
Yeah.
Right, so it's like it speaks to the naivety of Arindam, who doesn't know anything about the world of women but still wants something of it, or the world of writing but still wants
Something
something
of it.
of it.
Yeah.
Also of the novelist,
Yeah.
right, who wanders into like these projects. Like Naipaul once said that when I start a new book, I just start with an idea and then I'm struggling, and somewhere something maybe comes up or something it doesn't.
Yeah.
So like even the artist, you don't really know what's going on, but you still want it. You
Yeah.
want that. You want that thing that is out there.
So one last question, because you mentioned the title and I was going to ask you about it. And you've also mentioned this phrase that, the noble errors of the heart. So is this unknown city really a terrain of the heart? Because we're all floundering through it. We're all trying to find our way. Is that the inspiration for your title?
Yeah, yeah. In a way, see, like the couplet of Parveen Shakir's, like all good poetry, it can be read in many different ways.
Yeah.
So it can be the terrain of the heart. It can be even like the ambition, which is the big problem in Arindam Chatterjee's life.
Yeah.
Like it's a problem for anyone who went to IIT, or
Yeah.
those who went to IIT but couldn't wanted to go but couldn't get in.
Yeah.
Is that ambition? How well are you doing? How well are you going to do?
Yeah.
How well have you done now that everyone is at a certain age? Who started $1 billion company,
Yeah.
and who tried many times but always kept failing,
Right.
right? Who's a professor earning government salary? You know what I mean? So this it could be, there are many of these kind of our hopes and desires, our wishes pull us, even though we don't know a lot of what's going on there.
Thank you very much for this very animated conversation. I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience now. So anyone has any questions, please? Would you like to ask him something? No questions?
Anyone have anything to say? Please feel free.
I came a little late. I don't know if you had addressed this. So you said you went to IIT and then you went to US. And what was the moment that you decided to become a writer, or were you always writing? And the second thing is, what is your writing process? Do you have a disciplined framework? Do you write every day, or you wait for that inspiration? Did you ever encounter writer's block?
Right, right. So yeah, I think I was pretty, like, I always had this idea that I wanted to be a writer. I think when I was in class 9, there was a competition. We had 8 sections in our class. There was an inter-section competition. I came third. So I thought, okay, I'm third out of 8, so that means I must be a writer. So, and I always thought I would do that, and that's something it just never left me. Um, And see, as far as process, I think it changes from time to time, because whatever, wherever your life stage is at that particular time, you have to accommodate other responsibilities and all into it in order to be able to write. So when I was younger, I used to write every so often. Every few weeks, I would write a little bit. Nowadays, I try to write regularly, but then some week I'll have a lot of work or something else will come up. So I try to hold on to it. I think of writing it like, in the earlier movies in the 70s and 80s, there's a scene in the end where the villain is driving in the car and the hero is holding on, and he turns and the hero almost falls off, but he keeps holding. So I think of it like that, that if you keep holding on to the novel project and you don't leave your hands, eventually it will finish. So that's but the problem is getting your fingers onto the car. So writer's block, of course, it happens. I think when you're when there are unresolved issues, when you don't know that something is bothering you, and what is the nature of it, then it's harder to write. And as the shape of what it is that is bothering you comes into view, then the writing also suggests itself. Or maybe it's the other way around, that when you, in my experience, it has been that if you have the right project, that shows you what is bothering you at that time in your life. It shows you what you are thinking about inside. So she asked the question, that why does Arindam go back, right? Why did I decide to write this book? I don't know, but I can tell you that after I wrote this book, I felt that there were some things in my heart that felt calmer. Some questions that I had, whose answers I didn't get, but their urgency of those questions came down, is reduced. So I felt more at ease with my life after I'd written this book. So writer's block, I think it does happen, but writing is a beautiful way of better understanding what's going on inside.
That very cathartic note. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And
Thanks so much,
we'll
Radhika.
conclude now. Thanks
Okay.
so much.
Thank you. Thanks.